The average farm in America, something like 50% of their expenses are fuel. Ours is 5%. So we determined that fuel could go to like $8 to $10 a gallon for diesel fuel, and we'd still be okay. And so even though you could say, well, you're still dependent on diesel fuel. Yeah, that's correct. But as a percentage of our expense and our production, it's light years different than the average outfit. Factory farms, or as they're known as concentrated animal feeding operations, are a perfect example of a model that only exists or looks efficient as long as there's very cheap fuel. 1,500 miles under every morsel of food, or average under every morsel of food in the country, only looks efficient when you have cheap energy. As soon as you don't have cheap energy, the concentration of the animals, where all of their food has to be brought from afar, and the food grown from with petroleum fertilizer from afar, and then dried with petroleum, and then transported with petroleum, and that's just to get it to the concentrated animal feeding operation, and then to take the animals and process them somewhere else, to transport them somewhere else, to transport all their manure somewhere else, and then to transport the final processed, meat or vegetable or whatever, to an end user 1,500 miles away. That whole system just uses copious amounts of energy that don't have to be used on a, if all of this were localized. We're getting, Greenie awards for kitchens, institutional kitchens, that are trucking their kitchen scraps 8 miles away to be composted. Well, look at the carbon footprint and the energy footprint to go compost it. Why not attach the chickens to the kitchen? I mean, maybe not literally, but at least in proximity, so that the kitchen scraps can go feed the chickens, the eggs can come right back into the kitchen, and you just have a totally closed loop where no fuel has to be expended at all, except a couple of people to cart the garbage out and cart the eggs in. That is an integrated system. People ask, well, how can this, possibly feed the world? Well, we've got 35 million acres of lawn in the U.S. 35 million acres of lawn and 36 million acres housing and feeding recreational horses. That's 71 million acres. That's enough to grow all the food for the U.S. without a single farm. But what's keeping it from happening are all sorts of regulatory things. No, you can't have chickens in your house. Chickens are dirty. You can't buy milk from a farmer unless it comes from a bottling plant. You can't, a farmer can't sell cheese. You can't butcher a chicken. You can't make sausage from a pig and sell it to a neighbor, because it's got to be in a $500,000 quintuple permitted agriculturally zoned prohibited facility full of stainless steel and rebar, in which an inspector can sit there and push a button and stop it if there's anything that, and so it's this, I call it a food inquisition. As we're moving forward, there's a food inquisition in this country that doesn't recognize the inherent relational transparency of local food systems. That is every bit as safe and protective as a mountain of paperwork generated by the Beltway, by inside the Beltway. So it's the regulatory climate, the penetration of the government into the regulatory climate that makes these non-scalable regulations that capriciously and arbitrarily exclude small local food producers, processors, canneries, cheesemakers, raw milk producers from accessing the market. When a government gets between my lips and my throat, I call that an invasion of privacy. I think it could be argued that a civilization like ours, where the average person, by a long shot, is this far removed from their ecological umbilical, can it even survive? I think that's a valid question. Now, as soon as we ask that, then of course the next question is, well, how do I get reconnected? How do I reattach to this ecological umbilical, if you will? And different people could have different answers. My answer is, for the average, urban person, is buy unprocessed food. That does two things. One is it quits patronizing the outrageous food processing industry, which pulls heritage food apart, stuff that you can pronounce, and by the time you get it on the label, 80% of the stuff you can't pronounce anymore. And I think that unpronounceable food is going to end up being one of the most atrocious, abnormal things that our civilization has ever done. So if we're going to go back to pronounceable food, we need to get unprocessed food. And what that means is that we're going to have to get in touch with our kitchens. No culture in history has ever spent more money remodeling and gadgetizing its kitchens and been more lost as to where they are. So we've got to get our noses out of People magazine and get up off the couch and get jazzed and excited about rediscovering domestic culinary arts. And that combination of getting unprocessed and rediscovering our domestic culinary arts will go a long ways in stopping the patronage, if you will, of that food manufacturing association, and it will then encourage people to buy locally, because most local farmers are not processing to the point of unpronounceable food. And so this liberates, the average eater from having to feel like they've got to shop at the supermarket. Once they discover their culinary expertise, well, then they can shop at their local farmer, and we're in business. Then we're relocalizing. But as long as you think breakfast is Fruit Loops and Twinkies, and supper comes in a DiGiorno's frozen pizza box, okay? As long as that's considered food, that's going to patronize all of the industrial, long-distance, energy-sapping, designs of the current food system. So we've got to eat unprocessed. We've got to find our kitchens, and then we've got to go find our food treasures in our own communities. Talk about something that's immoral, in my opinion, is like in our county, we're building 500 to 800 houses a year. Most of them are, are developments. The little with the cul-de-sac. All right, the regular development. You know what? I haven't seen one house in the entire county going in that has a southern exposure or a greenhouse attached to it. Every single southern exposure should have a sunroom, a solarium, something to get passive solar gain. I mean, that's a no-brainer. That's a no-brainer. And yet people are still just building these stick houses with no indication to southern as anything. Well, the solarium not only cuts your energy bill by heating the house, but it also is something you can grow plants in the wintertime to get your fresh mesclun mix and cabbage and lettuce and all that during the wintertime. So now you don't have to get, E. coli possible mesclun mix from San Joaquin Valley in California. Now California can feed itself. I was just in California for a week last week, and and out there, they're sitting here saying, well, how in the world can California feed California? Look at the population of California. Well, California can easily feed California if California doesn't have to feed the East Coast. So if there's one really good use for petroleum, it would be this. If all the petroleum, here's a good one, if all the petroleum that had gone through refrigerated trucks transporting basically water and a little bit of taste from California to the East Coast in the wintertime, so the East Coast can get fresh tomatoes and peppers and mescaline mix in the wintertime. If that energy had gone into plastic to build hoop houses and solariums on the East Coast, we would not have had to have the highway system. We would not have had all the trucking system, and California could feed California, and the East Coast could feed the East Coast, even in the wintertime with season extensions. So, you know, it's not like it's a zero-sum game. We stop spending the money on trucking, and instead we put the petroleum in plastic for season extensions. Now we eat better, there's no transportation energy, and all this trucking and highway dollars and all that stuff, a lot of those people would like to be farmers too. You know, if a lot of them are part-time farmers, they can become full-time farmers, you know, doing that sort of thing. So ultimately, I don't think you can have an energy sensible system as long as we have the food this segregated in the world. You have to integrate the food production. So that means our lawns need to become edible landscapes. Our kitchens need to get chickens attached to them. Our southern exposures need solariums attached to them. And then you know we can start doing you know, composting toilets and moldering toilets, and then we can get all the sewage out of its transportation. And as you start doing this, as you start integrating these waste streams, energy streams, and food streams, then the chain becomes shorter and shorter and shorter until there's almost no energy used in their cycling. And then they just become a biocycle that goes locally back and forth as all this becomes localized.
Please come back and watch complete interviews with each of the experts. And you can join me, Tom Hartman, anytime on the web at tomhartman.com.